Hello there. I just had the most interesting experience, and so I kind of wanted to talk about it. I'm Melissa Lemon, and I work as an intuitive healing specialist. And today I had the opportunity to go and talk to the principal of my daughter's seminary. So this is crazy because I actually went to talk to him about something else. And sorry, I just felt this well up of frustration of how difficult it is to get your child transferred to a different class from seminary. It's like, gotta, get a freaking law passed or something. Anyway, it's just not easy. And I knew it wasn't going to be easy. And anyway, this is a really nice man. And I need to take that back because that's not the experience that I had. This is a man who's trying to be a nice man. And I believe this is a good man. And anyway, so our conversation was interesting, and in there he asked me, first of all, insinuating that because, my daughter's, having this issue, and basically brings up the question, what are you going to do to teach your child that, we don't always have teachers that we like in life. And I was like, it's interesting that you should ask me that question. And I was like, my personal standard is if it affects my mental health, duh, I have agency. Why would I sit through a class of a crappy teacher? I'm sorry, if I'm taking a class online or if I want to take a class, I absolutely am going to research the teaching method, the whatever. But anyway, he has a legitimate question. What do we do when we have teachers in our lives, especially, I think he was especially implying at church. He even asked me, what if you have a bishop that you don't jive with? And I was like, I've had a lot of bishops I don't jive with. And what do? I avoid them like the plague. I don't go to church to see my bishop. I go to church to take the sacrament because Jesus Christ told me to take the sacrament. I just was kind of confused by the question, but I was like, that's my standard. And then, he had to ask my daughter because my answer was not a very good one. No, he didn't ask her. He told her. I don't remember. He said, he gave better advice than me, I'm sure. But, anyway, sorry, I'm obviously still processing this in real time. And so, but one of the things I said when he asked me that question, I was like, I don't, if it's false doctrine going on or I literally sat through a Sunday school lesson a few weeks ago where just all kinds of crazy opinions were being thrown out there. And I was like, what the heck? This is not us talking about the welfare of our souls and focusing on Jesus. This is ridiculous. And that happens a lot in Sunday school at church. That's been my experience. And there are times it is incredibly difficult for me to sit through that. Bleep. And so, anyway, that's my standard. If I'm sitting there and I'm working through cognitive dissonance the whole lesson and trying to breathe through my emotions, honestly, it's better for me to just go home and study my scriptures, write my journal. It's way better. It's better for me to go sit out in the hall and find an ancestor on Family Search than to sit through that. And believe me, there are times where I can handle it. There are times where I can even raise my hand and bring us back to some truth for a second. And there are a lot of people that do that, and I'm so grateful. That's not my gift. That is incredibly difficult for me, but sometimes I have a moment where I can do that. Great, because I know some people are going to be like, well, if you don't like it, you should just make it better. Right? How many times have we heard that in our lives? Okay. Shame-filled talk. It's part of our culture. So just calling it for what it is. Anyway, so because I just had this prompting at the end, my daughter had decided to go to class because she was saying I'm not going home. Anyway, and I just had this thought you need to ask him about false doctrine. And I was like, okay. So I was like, actually, can I talk to you for a few more minutes? And so my daughter left, and I was like, speaking of false doctrine, like, you guys don't still teach polygamy, do you? And he was like, oh, no, 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 of course not, we don't teach it. And I was like, oh, good. And then I was like, we're not talking about the same thing. And I was like, okay, I get that you probably don't teach it as like a practice, like a current okay practice, but do you teach it as like a thing, like a real thing? And like, oh, he's like, oh, yeah. Totally teach it as like, it was revelation and this is from God, blah, 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 blah. And at that point I was like, oh my hell. I can't believe I've let my daughters sit through 4 years each of listening to that. Because honestly, we didn't talk about it at home as much. And I used to defend polygamy. And so, not that I've ever defended it to my daughters, I don't believe. Because I probably could not have. Oh, it makes my heart sick to even think about doing that. So, I've defended it to people outside of the church. I don't think I've ever defended it to my daughters. And I don't think that I could. I don't think I would have had the heart to do that. So, it's a good thing I still have a heart. So, okay. So, I just had this super long conversation with this guy about polygamy. And he asked me all kinds of questions. I kind of felt like I was being interrogated a little bit. And which, you know, he's just trying to get understanding, like, how can you still be in this church and believe that that is not a thing? It was hilarious because he was asking me all these questions. I don't think he was intentionally trying to trip me up. I do think he was actually trying to understand my perspective, but he couldn't. Because he believes the diatribe that I believed my whole life up until a few years ago when I was like, oh, actually, this makes way more sense, all this other stuff. So I don't believe that polygamy was ever... commanded by God. I don't believe that God... Sorry, I'm trying to think of a way to say this. It makes the most sense, and I'm failing miserably. But I do not believe that God ever commanded his children to live in polygamy because I believe he loves his children more than that. And it's so fascinating to me. Like I even said, like, haven't you ever questioned polygamy? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, well, why don't you listen to your gut? He was like, well, because, I don't remember what he said, but he's very much in this school of thought of like, these are the living prophets and what they said. And it was so funny. I wish I could have thought of one of the ridiculous things one of the prophets has said that we know is clearly not true, because he was like, what they say, everything they say, every single thing. And I was just like, really? Every single thing? Because there's things every conference that I'm like, that's not actually true. Like, logically doesn't actually make sense if you think about it. So, you know what? Everybody makes mistakes. And sometimes people actually do worse than make mistakes and commit really bad sins. Like having more than one wife and saying God told you to do it. And I'm not talking about Joseph Smith. So sorry to all those people who are so excited to bash on Joseph Smith with me. I don't bash on anybody, by the way. I just call things how they see it. In fact, I was talking to somebody one day about this Brigham Young thing, and they were getting upset. Like, how can you like talk bad about the prophet, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I'm sorry. I'm not bashing anybody. I'm just stating a fact. And the fact is he had 50 whatever wives. That's the fact. So you can call it bashing if you want, but it's actually just a fact. So, and it's the same thing with Joseph Smith. Like, there's so much more available evidence for all of us to go view online if we would like to know that there exists this much contemporaneous evidence that Joseph Smith received a revelation on polygamy or practiced polygamy. This much contemporaneous evidence. That's a 0. I'm holding up with my hand. Yes, I'm being kind of snarky about this, and I'm sorry, but anyway, what bothered me about this conversation? Oh, I was driving away. I was like, oh, that's like kind of a mean thing to ask somebody. It was basically like, why are you here? Why are you still a member of the church if you don't believe that polygamy is true? Like, what is wrong with you? And obviously that's not the way that he said it. But as I was driving away and feeling the emotion behind that question when somebody asks you, like, why are you still here? Like, if you don't believe this is true, get out, right? Just leave. And I was like, I believe in Jesus Christ. And I was like, I believe in the restoration through the prophet Joseph Smith. I don't believe that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy or that he was ever taught polygamy. And I get that that's really hard for people to hear when they, when he, of course, I know it's true at the end. He had to say, I know it's true. Thank you for your time. Like, and I was like, okay, bye. Like, I get that you're done with this conversation, and that's okay. But it was interesting because the idea of, like, why are you here? Why are you still here if you don't believe? Oh, guys, that is such a dangerous attitude. Do you know how many people still go to church even though they were raped by a bishop? Or, I mean, I just picked, the crazy, most extreme thing, and I would bet that most people that have had that experience don't go to church anymore. But everybody who comes to church, most of the people who come to church, I do believe there are some people who should not be allowed at church, believe it or not. Because I believe that women and children deserve to be protected. And so I do not believe that predators belong at church. I do not believe that sexual predators belong at church. In fact, I believe they probably should go to church in prison. I mean, obviously they need Jesus. Obviously, church is for everybody. But I believe so strongly in protecting women and children. And I'm a woman. Why am I like, this is the men's job, guys. This is the men's job. I shouldn't have to be saying this. Sorry. Sorry. That was rude and judgmental. I'm sorry. But anyway, everybody that's coming to church that's struggling with their testimony, like, I don't think that is a good question to ask. Like, why are you still here? I think, like, and I don't think I think that was a little bit of his tone, but I have to give him credit because I do think he was honestly trying to understand. He could not understand. And honestly, that makes me have so much compassion for him. And it makes me feel really sad for him. And honestly, I'm just so grateful that I don't believe that anymore. Because it's a yucky, horrible thing to believe. That God would ask his children to practice polygamy. Ugh, it makes me want to vomit, honestly. Polygamy is something very different than what church historians have taught us. And thereby what church leaders have taught us. And that's a cycle. What church leaders have taught us, and therefore what historians have taught us, and what historians have taught us, and therefore what church leaders have taught us. There's this kind of cycle that exists in there that I don't think is good. And you know what? There are people out there talking about this. And I hope that if you are like, first of all, please don't hate on me, because why would you do that? Second of all, if you're experiencing cognitive dissonance and you're like, oh my gosh, how can she believe that? Oh my gosh, what is wrong with her? How can she believe that? I would encourage you to take a deep breath and look inside yourself and say, why do I believe that polygamy is true? Like, why do I believe polygamy is true? What's the foundation of that testimony? And go figure out your own life and stop worrying about my life and what I believe. But if you watch this video and you're like, oh, wait, what is she talking about? Like, I've never heard this before. Like, what does she mean? There's zero contemporaneous evidence for Joseph Smith practicing polygamy or receiving a revelation on polygamy. What are you talking about? I'm talking about what I've learned the last 2 years. And I have learned this almost exclusively from a woman named Michelle Stone. And she has a podcast called 132 Problems on YouTube. She has a website, all those things. Like, she has over 132 episodes because her 132nd episode came out recently, which is kind of a big deal for her podcast called 132 Problems. Go, if you are curious about what I'm talking about, go watch it. Go listen to it. If you're afraid of hearing words that people say, it's time to do some emotional healing. Book a session. Anyway, if you watch this video, thank you so much. I really just had to process what happened, and I'm probably not done. I probably need to go journal on it, but those were just some thoughts I was having after I had this experience today, and I feel like there's something more that I need to say. And I really think it's about Zion. Just how impossible it is for us to have Zion, because we are so divided, and we're divided for good reason. If one person believes that polygamy was commanded of God, and that's what, the prophets have said, and the prophets' word is like basically better than God's word, because that's kind of what they're saying when they believe in polygamy, just in my opinion. That's my opinion, but I mean, I could write an essay about it with evidence and stuff, but I'm definitely not going to do that because I don't have the time. But we cannot be of one heart and one mind when we believe such opposing things. And I do not want to be of one heart and one mind with anybody who embraces polygamy in any way. Because my heart and my mind find great solace and comfort and reassurance from God Himself that this is where I belong, and believing that I am worth having one man to myself. And so are all the girls. And the same goes the other way around. I know that the opposite problem doesn't really exist as much, but all the guys are worthy of having one good woman who loves them faithfully, and vice versa. Guess what? We all deserve that. So anyway, those are my thoughts. You're awesome. You deserve love. You deserve good things in your life. God loves us, guys. Oh, how He loves us. Oh, how that love has been messed up by our earth experience. The love hasn't been messed up. Our perception of the love has been messed up by earth experience, but it is there, guys, and it is bigger than that mountain in front of me.